Well, hi everyone, it's Ron Vaillant. Hope you're having a great day. If things aren't complicated enough in Canada with the federal election the way it went and Western separation on the rise, you have to also factor in what we're about to watch here. If you only have a couple minutes, just go and watch the last 2.5 minutes of this video. But it's very important to watch the whole thing, quite frankly. Basically, what's being stated here is that Canada was not confederated in 1867 and that our government system right now that we have is not legitimate. So it's pretty wild stuff, and it's kind of hard to wrap the brain around a little bit. So I'm sharing this not to say that this is absolute or in stone at all. I'm investigating it myself. I'm just sharing with you what I'm investigating. So just go ahead and take it in and prove it for yourself and see where it goes from here. All right, thanks.
We really want people to learn what's happened here. And the only way that we're going to make any change is once people understand what has happened in our history, can we then understand how we can change that. So without further ado, I guess we've got enough people on board here. I'm going to start the evening with chatting to you tonight about the British North American Act 1867, and we're going to take a few minutes, not a long time here. And I just want to go over a couple of things. Now, first and foremost, one needs to understand that this is not a constitution. It was never designed as a constitution. It was not Articles of Confederation. It is not a confederation document. It is only one thing. It is letters patent, and it was designed for the Governor General. And we go into this, if you go to the very first page, if you have it in front of you, you'll see that there's been a couple of things that have been removed. First of all, the one thing that has been removed or repealed is the enacting clause. And it says, "Be it therefore enacted, declared by the Queen's most excellent majesty, by and with the advice, consent of Lord spiritual and temporal and commons, in this present parliament assembled, and by the authority of the same as follows." That is the enacting clause. That has been repealed. It was repealed in 1893 by the Statutes Law Revision Act. Also, Section 2 has been repealed by that same act of 1893. And Section 2 reads, "The application of provisions referring to the Queen. The provisions of this act referring to Her Majesty the Queen also extend to her heirs and successors of Her Majesty Kings and Queens of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland." That has been removed. So there are no more heirs and successors. So this document only pertains to one monarch, the Queen of England, Queen Victoria. Now we go into the document itself. Part 2 is called the Union, and it's the Declaration of the Union. Now this is a very important piece. "It shall be lawful for the Queen, Queen Victoria, by and with the advice of Her Majesty's most honorable Privy Council, to declare by proclamation," which she did in 1867, "that on and after a day therein appointed, not being more than 6 months after the passing of this act, the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick shall form and be one dominion under the name of Canada, and on and after that day those three provinces shall form one dominion under that name accordingly." Very important. What is a dominion? According to Statutes Law Revision Act 1889, a dominion is a colony. Remember that. So we're going to move down into Part 3, executive power. The declaration of the executive power in the Queen. This is Section 9. "The executive government and authority of and over Canada is hereby declared to continue and be vested in the Queen." So, what Queen? Queen Victoria, period. We move down a little bit further to Section 12. "All powers under acts to be exercised by Governor General with advice of Privy Council, or, very much specifically, or alone." In other words, he don't need nobody to create law here in Canada under the British North American Act when it was given to him by Queen Victoria. We go down just a little bit further to the number 14, where it says, "Power to Her Majesty to authorize the Governor General to appoint deputies." So, the Queen has absolute power. She gives power to the Governor General, who has absolute power over all of Canada, including the creation of the federal government and the creation of the provincial government. How does he do the provincial governments? Section 14, power to Her Majesty to authorize the Governor General to appoint deputies. What are his deputies? The lieutenant governors. Absolute power. This is not a constitution. This is letters patent handed to a Governor General for tyrannical power over the Dominion of Canada, a united colony for and on behalf of the British Empire. So now that we've got this out of the way, on January 22nd, 1901, Queen Victoria died. And with her, the Dominion of Canada died. And with that death, the British North American Act, which only applies to Queen Victoria and none others due to Section 2 being repealed, went with her. So no governor, no legal or lawful Governor General could be given these letters patent because the next one that came in was a king. And the act to this day, if you look at the archives of Ottawa, this act only pertains to one monarch, Queen Victoria, period. Not Queen Elizabeth, as they'd have you believe, but no, just Queen Victoria. So, what happened in 1901? After that, after Queen Victoria's death, so after her death, what happened? Well, a lot of things started to happen, and a lot of things were happening in the Western provinces. In 1902, there was an oil discovery. And hang on, if I can, there was an oil discovery found. They were finding that it hit about 300 barrels a day in 1902 in Alberta. By 1904, that was up to 8,000 barrels a day. And the boys in Ottawa started to salivate because oil was turned into gasoline, and gasoline was burned in automobiles and trucks and trains, et cetera, and there was money in it. And the boys in Ottawa, like I say, started to salivate. They started to see, oh my goodness, we need to create some provinces. But the British North American Act, 1867, died with Queen Victoria. Remember that? So they had trouble. So what did they do? They decided that they were going to create Alberta and Saskatchewan under the British North American Act, 1871. Now, the 1871 Act isn't out for you to follow along. I just want to read you the pertinent part right now, just to give you an idea of what this act was for. It says, whereas doubts have been entertained respecting the powers of Parliament of Canada to establish provinces in territories admitted or which may hereinafter be admitted to the Dominion of Canada, and to provide for the representation of such provinces in the said Parliament, and it is expedient to remove such doubts and to vest such powers in the said Parliament. So, this act was created by the English government in 1871, and it was sent to Manitoba. The Manitoba government to prove that the Dominion of Canada had the right under Section 146 of that act to allow Manitoba to become part of the Dominion of Canada. That's what this act was for, period. Nothing more. They created a second British North American Act in 1886, and that act was created for the allowance of the Yukon to come into Canada. It was given to them, and to quell any fears with British Columbia, it was given to them. And basically, the 1886 Act was a photocopy of the 1871 Act, and it was designed so that people wouldn't get upset, because the Dominion was in Ottawa, several thousand miles away, and they were out on the prairies, out on the territories, et cetera, the other end of the country, with disbelief that somehow Ottawa had power over them. So these acts were sent out for that particular reason. So how, in 1905, 4 years after the death of Queen Victoria, are they legally and lawfully enacting the Alberta Act and the Saskatchewan Act, based on the British North American Act, 1871? Well, the reality is they're not doing it legally and lawfully. They're doing it because, once again, they need to wet their beaks on what's going on with natural resources in the Western provinces. Now, we'll get into this a little bit further with the imperial conferences that were going on. Now, the imperial conferences started in 1907. Then they held another one in 1911, another one in 1923, another one in 1926, and the final one in 1930. Now, what these imperial conferences did is that they invited all of the prime ministers from all of the dominions all over the world, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, etc., and they would come to England, and they would figure out how they could continue to bamboozle the people into believing nothing had happened. Nothing had changed. The Dominion is living on. And the empire is living on. And so these conferences were designed to continue to allow them to have time to figure out how they could usurp the power of the sovereign people. The big one for them was Canada, because Canada was starting to flex its muscles. And in 1923, before the Imperial Conference, which is why the 1923 Imperial Conference was called, Canada, unbeknownst to the Empire, decided to go and enter into a treaty with the United States. And that treaty was called the Halibut Treaty. And they didn't confer with the United States at all. They didn't confer with the Governor General. They did it all by themselves. And why? Because the boys knew that they weren't a dominion anymore. But they weren't a sovereign nation either, because they hadn't constituted a legal and lawful government. So by 1926, things were starting to break apart within the British Empire. As a matter of fact, in 1925, the British Empire came to an end. And they decided to change the name of the British Empire to the Commonwealth. And they decided at that point, because Australia had now seated a de jure government, New Zealand was in process of doing just that, they decided that they needed to allow the rest of the colonies to go and seat de jure governments under a constitution, so that they could then be sovereign nations and join the Commonwealth. Because as the Commonwealth, you couldn't join unless you were a sovereign nation. So the Imperial Conference in 1926 was called a secret Imperial Conference. And at that conference, a gentleman by the name of Russell Rogers Smith had given Mackenzie King the minutes from the Native Sons of Canada meeting earlier that year. And Mackenzie King took those to this Imperial Conference. He took these to the conference, and they were adopted in their entirety and made as part of the Balfour Declaration 1926. So these guys needed to figure out how they could still maintain control, and they came up with something very interesting. Time went by, and they went and created, where they actually had the British government create for them, the British North American Act 1930. And this was done in July of 1930. The Imperial Conferences were held for 1930, 1929, 1930, were held in December through January. And they thought that this would be a good idea, especially for Canada. Now, the British North American Act 1930 for Canada is a very interesting document. And I'm hoping that people have this and we're able to download it off of our Facebook page and are able to scroll down and see the schedules. And Schedule 1, Manitoba, Schedule 2, as I scroll down. Anyways, they're various provinces. Schedule 2 is Alberta. Schedule 3 is Saskatchewan, I believe. Schedule 4 is British Columbia. Okay. And so what are these schedules about? Well, these schedules were created for, and here it is, the Natural Resource Act. So Alberta Natural Resources Act, the Saskatchewan Natural Resources Act, the Manitoba Natural Resources Act, and the British Columbia Natural Resources Act. So what are these all about? Well, let me read it to you. Transfer of public lands generally. In order that the provinces may be in the same position as the original provinces of Confederation, are in virtue of Section 109 of the British North American Act, the interests of the Crown in all Crown lands, mines, minerals, precious and base metals, and royalties derived therefrom within the province, and the interest of the Crown in waters and water powers within the province under the Northwest Irrigation Act 1898 and the Dominion Water Power Act, and all sums due or payable for such lands, mines, minerals, and royalties, or for the interest or rights in or to the use of such waters or water powers, and it goes on. Now, if you look at the British North American Act 1930, you go down to Alberta and you go down to transfer public lands generally, that's the clause. The schedules were taken out and passed by the Dominion of Canada government into these acts. Now, so let's go look at 109. So if we go look at 109, what does it say in the original British North American Act from 1867? Don't forget, 1867, who died? So 109 says, property in lands, mines, and sea. All lands, mines, minerals, and royalties belonging to several provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick at the Union. Remember, at the Union means when the Dominion of Canada was consummated under the letters patent as a colony to the British Empire. So at the Union is the colony. And all sums then due or payable for such lands, mines, and minerals, royalties shall belong to said provinces, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, in which the same are situate or arise subject to any trusts existing in respect thereof and to any interest other than that of the province of the same. So what does that mean? Well, as the Dominion of Canada, all of the rights, the lands, the minerals, etc., belong to the provinces and to the Dominion of Canada, the central legislature for the United Colony. They would share in this along with, guess who? The British Empire. So the crown that they're speaking of in this is the crown in chancery, not the king or the queen, because the crown in chancery held a lodial title to all the lands under Rupert's Land Act, and when this particular document called the British North American Act, 1867, letters patent, was created, they took control of all the lands of all the provinces and territories in Canada. Remember that. So this is 1930. So these guys are licking their chops. They're in there. They've got their beaks now nice and wet. They've got control over the territories. They have control over the provinces, all the resources under your feet, and they're thinking they got control over the land. But the Statute of Westminster came along. And remember I said there was a little fellow named Russell Roger Smith who gave Mackenzie King the minutes from the Native Sons of Canada, and they were incorporated into the Balfour Declaration in their entirety. Well, here's what happened. In 1930, at the Imperial Conference in 1930, they said the Balfour Declaration needs to go to the UK Parliament so the UK Parliament can create the Statute of Westminster. And lo and behold, they did. The only problem was Russell Roger Smith wanted absolute sovereignty for all the provinces. So they incorporated that into the Statute of Westminster. And when they did, and it was passed, and it was handed to Canada, they freaked out because all of their work of theft from 1901 through 1930 was gone in a millisecond. They no longer had control over the resources or the land of the provinces. It went back to we, the people. They screamed from the rafters, nothing has changed, nothing has changed. The Dominion lives on. But everything changed. And this is the secret that they don't want you to know. The land under your feet is yours. The resources under that land are yours. The water resources are yours. The Statute of Westminster gave it to we, the people, in 1931. That's why on December the 12th, 1931, they freaked out. And today, the boys at WEXIT, they know this. And they want to create a federal party to go to Ottawa so they can dip their beak and take the power and the wealth and throw the crumbs back to we the people on the land and the resources that we own. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's it in a nutshell. Now you can see what this is all about. It has nothing to do with freedom for the people. It has everything to do with wealth and power for them and more or less crumbs for you and I.